April 17, 1860. Sacramento, California. The sorrel mare gallops into the Pony Express station at dawn, her flanks slick with sweat, her eyes wild with terror. The station manager, Robert Whitman, reaches for the bridle and freezes. The saddle is soaked in blood, still warm, still wet, dripping onto the dusty ground in thick, dark drops. The mochila, the leather mail pouch, hangs intact, every letter accounted for, every seal unbroken. But the rider is gone. William Billy Crandall, 19 years old, had departed from Placerville 14 hours earlier with 47 pieces of mail destined for Carson City. The route, 80 miles through the Sierra Nevada foothills, territory he'd ridden 17 times without incident. His replacement rider was waiting. The letters were to continue east. The schedule was sacred. The Pony Express promised 10 days from Missouri to California, and they'd never missed a deadline. But Billy Crandall never arrived. The horse did, alone, terrified, and covered in her rider's blood. What the investigation uncovered in the weeks that followed would expose a conspiracy that reached from the mining camps of the Comstock Lode to the halls of the California State Legislature, a conspiracy built on greed, territorial ambition, and the price of silence in the American frontier. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the Pony Express murder, the 1860 rider whose horse returned alone with blood on the saddle, the mystery that haunted the Wild West, make sure to subscribe to the Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell. We dig deep into history's darkest corners, bringing you the stories they tried to bury. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now let's descend into the shadows of 1860. The spring of 1860 marked a pivotal moment in American history. The nation stood fractured, teetering on the edge of civil war. Abraham Lincoln's presidential campaign dominated political discourse in the North, while Southern states openly discussed secession. California, admitted to the Union just 10 years prior, found itself geographically isolated, separated from the rest of the nation by 2,000 miles of hostile territory, scorching deserts, and mountain ranges that had claimed hundreds of lives during the gold rush. Communication between the coasts moved at the speed of a walking man. Letters sent by stagecoach took 25 days minimum to cross the continent. Ships sailing around Cape Horn required months. The telegraph network, still in its infancy, ended in Missouri. California might as well have been a separate country. Then came the Pony Express. On April 3, 1860, just 14 days before Billy Crandall's disappearance, the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company launched the most ambitious communication venture in American history. Young riders, none weighing more than 125 pounds, would carry mail on horseback across 1966 miles in 10 days. They would ride day and night, changing horses every 10 to 15 miles at relay stations scattered across the frontier. Each rider would cover 75 to 100 miles before passing the mochila to the next courier. The pay was substantial, 100 to 150 per month, when most laborers earned 25. But the danger was real. The recruitment advertisements were blunt. Wanted young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18. Must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred. Billy Crandall was perfect for the job. Born in 1841 in Pennsylvania, Billy had traveled west with his uncle after his parents died of cholera during the 1849 epidemic. He'd grown up in the saddle, working as a ranch hand in the Sacramento Valley. Friends described him as quiet, reliable, and fearless. He stood 5'7", weighed 118 pounds, and could ride for 12 hours straw. Ite without complaint. The Pony Express hired him in March 1860, assigning him to the California Division, the section considered safest, furthest from hostile Native American territory, far from the bandits that plagued the Nevada and Utah routes. His route connected Placerville to Carson City, traversing the western slope of the Sierra Nevada. The trail wound through pine forests and granite outcroppings, following the South Fork of the American River before climbing toward the high desert. Spring runoff swelled the creeks. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. It was beautiful country, but beauty conceals danger. The California gold rush had flooded the region with 49ers seeking fortune. By 1860, most of the easily accessible gold had been claimed. The mining camps scattered through the foothills had evolved into desperate communities clinging to diminishing resources. Placerville itself, originally called Hangtown for the vigilante justice dispensed from an oak tree in the town square, maintained a veneer of civilization, but violence simmered beneath the surface. And there were the rumors. Whispers of riders being followed, tales of strangers asking too many questions about mail schedules at relay stations, reports of campfires in the hills where no camps should be. Station managers dismissed these stories as frontier paranoia. The Pony Express had operated for 2 weeks without major incident. The company needed to establish reliability to secure the government mail contract worth $1 million annually. They couldn't afford scandal. They couldn't afford fear. So when Billy Crandall collected the mochila at the Placerville station on the evening of April 16, 1860, no one warned him that 3 riders had reported being trailed by unknown horsemen in the previous week. No one mentioned that the station keeper at Mormon Tavern, a relay point on Billy's route, had found horse tracks circling his building the night before. No one told him to be careful. They simply handed him the mail, reminded him of the schedule, and watched him disappear into the gathering dusk. It was the last time anyone saw Billy Crandall alive. James "Red" McGovern, a veteran rider on the same route, was the first to notice something wrong. On April 9th, 7 days before Billy's disappearance, Red departed Mormon Tavern Station at 2:00 p.m. carrying eastbound mail. The afternoon was clear, the trail familiar. 15 minutes into his ride, he heard hoofbeats behind him. In his later testimony to investigators, Red stated, "I looked back and seen 2 riders, maybe 300 yards distant. They was keeping pace. Not gaining, not falling back. Just keeping pace. That ain't natural. When you encounter riders on the trail, they either pass you or you pass them. Nobody just follows." Red spurred his mount, a fast buckskin mare named Sally. The following riders matched his pace. He slowed. They slowed. For 12 miles they maintained that precise distance. Red's account continues, "I know these trails better than my own face. There's a place where the path narrows between 2 granite walls, just before the ridge descent. I pushed Sally hard, got through the narrow, then pulled off trail behind a boulder outcropping. I waited there, quiet, watching. The 2 riders appeared minutes later. Red described them as rough-looking men, bearded, wearing dusters and wide-brimmed hats pulled low. They stopped at the narrow, looked around, seemed confused I'd vanished. One of them had a rifle across his saddle, not in a scabbard, across his lap, like he was ready to use it. They argued some, then turned back west." Red reported the incident to the station manager at Carson City. The manager recorded it in his log but took no action. The notation read, "McGovern reports followers, likely prospectors heading to same destination, no threat." But Red McGovern knew the difference between prospectors and predators. He'd survived 6 years on the frontier by trusting his instincts. He told anyone who would listen, those men was hunting, and I was the prey. Mormon Tavern Station, located approximately 20 miles east of Placerville, served as a critical relay point. The station keeper, a German immigrant named Klaus Hoffmann, maintained 6 horses for the Pony Express riders. The station stood isolated. The nearest neighbor lived 4 miles away. Klaus lived alone, sleeping in a small room attached to the stable. On the morning of April 12th, Klaus discovered one of the relay horses missing. The stable door stood open, though he clearly remembered bolting it the previous night. The missing horse, a 3-year-old bay gelding named Duke, was the fastest mount in the string, specifically reserved for urgent deliveries. Klaus found tracks in the soft earth outside the stable. Boot prints. At least 2 different men, possibly 3. The tracks led west into the forest, then disappeared on rocky ground. Klaus followed them for an hour before losing the trail. When he returned to the station, he discovered something he'd initially missed in his panic over the missing horse. Someone had been inside the station building. His personal belongings, clothing, food supplies, letters, had been carefully searched. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, but everything was subtly displaced. The box where he kept Pony Express records sat at a different angle on the shelf. His bunk blanket had been pulled back and smoothed again, but not quite right. Most disturbing, the drawer where he stored his personal journal lay open an inch. Klaus was meticulous about closing drawers completely. He wrote to the Pony Express regional supervisor, "I believe someone is watching the station. They took Duke to study him, perhaps to match his speed. They searched my quarters for information about rider schedules and mail contents. I request permission to arm myself and authorization to hire an assistant for security." The supervisor's response arrived 5 days later. Request denied. The company cannot afford to alarm the public with displays of weaponry at relay stations. Your concerns are noted. but likely exaggerated. The horse probably broke loose on its own. Secure your doors more carefully, Klaus Hoffman would later testify. They did not take me seriously. They thought I was a frightened immigrant seeing danger in shadows, but I knew. Someone was planning something terrible, and nobody would listen. Duke, the missing horse, was never recovered. Sarah Wickham ran the boarding house in Placerville, where several Pony Express riders lodged between runs. A widow with sharp eyes and a sharper memory, Sarah prided herself on knowing everything that happened in town. On April 14th, 2 days before Billy Crandall's final ride, 3 men checked into her establishment. She recorded them in her guest ledger. 3 men, paid cash for 2 nights, gave names as Smith, Jones, and Brown. No first names offered. Claimed to be surveying for the railroad. The names were obviously false. Sarah had seen enough frontier con men to recognize aliases, but their money was real and she needed the income. What troubled her was their behavior. The 3 men showed no interest in railroad surveying. They spent their time in the boarding house common room, drinking coffee, watching the street. Specifically, watching the Pony Express office across the road. Sarah observed them from her kitchen. They took turns at the window. One would watch while the others played cards. They noted when riders came and went. They seemed particularly interested in the young riders, the smaller ones who'd be carrying the lighter mail loads. On the evening of April 14th, one of the men, the tallest with a scar across his left cheek, struck up a conversation with Billy Crandall in the common room. Sarah heard fragments from the kitchen. You ride for the Express? I do. Must be dangerous work. It's honest work. What route they got you on? Billy, trust. Ing and naive answered. Placerville to Carson City, 80 miles through good country. You carry much mail? Depends on the day, sometimes 40, 50 pieces. Valuable mail? Billy shrugged. Letters mostly, business correspondence, some legal documents. Nothing I concern myself with. My job is delivery, not content. The scarred man leaned closer. Sarah couldn't hear his next question, but she heard Billy's response. I ride every 4th day. Weather permitting, I make the run in about 14 hours with the horse changes. The conversation ended shortly after. Billy retired to his room. The 3 strangers exchanged glances Sarah would later describe as meaningful and dark. At dawn on April 15th, the 3 men checked out, claiming their surveying work was taking them south toward Sacramento. But Sarah watched from her upstairs window as they rode east, the same direction as Billy's route. She told her neighbor, those men were not surveyors, and I fear they mean mischief for that boy. The neighbor dismissed her concerns. You worry too much, Sarah. Placerville's civilized now, the hanging tree days are over. But Sarah Wickham couldn't shake her dread. That evening she walked to the Pony Express office and asked to speak with the station manager. He was busy preparing mail pouches and dismissed her curtly. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but these boys can handle themselves. Billy's ridden this route over a dozen times, he'll be fine. Sarah returned home and wrote in her diary. April 15, 1860. I spoke to the express manager about my concerns regarding the strangers. He would not listen. I fear we will regret this disregard. I pray I am wrong, but my heart tells me tragedy approaches. On the morning Billy Crandall was scheduled to ride, another incident occurred that should have stopped the departure entirely. Thomas Brennan, a freighter hauling supplies to the mountain mining camps, was ambushed on the trail between Placerville and Mormon Tavern at approximately 10 a.m. 3 masked riders emerged from the tree line and blocked his wagon. Brennan described the encounter in his sworn statement to the El Dorado County Sheriff. They had their faces covered with bandanas. The one in the middle aimed a rifle at my chest and said, We're not here for you. Turn your wagon around and forget you've seen us. I said I had deliveries to make. He fired a shot into the air and said, Your deliveries can wait. Nobody travels this road today. I'm no fool. I turned around. Brennan reported the incident to the sheriff's office at 11:30 a.m. Deputy Marshal Henry Clark recorded the complaint but took no immediate action. In his defense, Clark later testified, Placerville was a town of 3,000 people with 1 sheriff and 2 deputies. We had 3 active investigations of claim jumping, 2 assault cases, and a murder trial beginning that week. A freighter getting scared by masked men. Hell, that happened twice a month. I told him we'd look into it when we had time. That afternoon, Deputy Clark happened to be at the Pony Express office when Billy Crandall arrived to collect the evening mail. Clark mentioned the freighter incident in passing. You might keep your eyes open on the trail tonight. Some masked riders spooked Thomas Brennan this morning. Billy's response, remembered clearly by 3 witnesses, was, were they on the main trail or the upper fork? Brennan didn't say, I can take the upper fork if needed. Ads may be 40 minutes, but it's safer if there's trouble on the lower route, the station manager interjected. You'll take the scheduled route. The express runs on time, not on fear. Those riders were probably drunk miners blowing off steam. Billy deferred to his supervisor's judgment. He collected the mochila containing 47 pieces of mail, mounted his sorrel mare Bella, and departed at 6:45 p.m. as scheduled. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky blood re. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about frontier justice. Let's discover what happens next. April 17, 1860. Dawn breaks cold and gray over Sacramento. Robert Whitman has managed the Sacramento Pony Express station for 3 months. A former Army scout, he prides himself on punctuality and efficiency. Billy Crandall's replacement rider, 16-year-old Michael Torres, has been waiting since midnight, the expected arrival time. But midnight came and went. So did 1:00 a.m. and 2 a.m. By 4:00 a.m., Whitman is pacing the station platform. By 5:00 a.m., he's considering sending a rider back along the route to investigate. At 5:47 a.m., as pink light touches the eastern horizon, he hears hoofbeats approaching fast from the west. Bella, Billy's sorrel mare, gallops into view. Whitman's first thought is relief. The rider is making up lost time. Then he sees the empty saddle. Then he sees the blood. Later, in his official report to the Pony Express Company headquarters, Whitman would write, "The mare arrived in extreme distress. Foam covered her chest and flanks. Her eyes showed white, rolling in panic. She fought the bridle when I attempted to calm her, but it was the saddle that seized my attention immediately. The entire seat was saturated with blood, fresh blood, still tacky to the touch. It had soaked through the leather and into the saddle blanket. Arterial spray patterns covered the cantle and the mare's right flank. The mochila remained secured with all mail intact. Whitman's military experience allowed him to assess the scene clinically. The blood volume, he estimated between 2 and 3 pints, indicated a severe wound. The spray pattern suggested arterial bleeding from the upper body or neck. The blood's condition indicated it had been deposited within the past 2 to 4 hours. Michael Torres, the waiting rider, vomited behind the stable. Whitman immediately sent 2 actions into motion. First, he dispatched a rider to alert the El Dorado County Sheriff in Placerville. Second, he secured the saddle and mochila as evidence, then began examining Bella for injuries. The mare bore no wounds. The blood was entirely human. At 7:30 a.m., Sheriff Jacob Blackwell arrived from Placerville, with Deputy Clark and a 4-man posse. Blackwell, a former Texas Ranger with 20 years of law enforcement experience, took control of the investigation. His first order was to organize a search party to ride west along the route, looking for Billy Crandall or his body. But Blackwell noticed something that Whitman had missed in his initial shock. On Bella's right shoulder, barely visible beneath dried sweat and dust, someone had written 2 letters in blood, H and K. Blackwell photographed the letters before they could be disturbed. The photographer, Samuel Chen, captured the image using the wet plate collodion process, a painstaking procedure requiring a portable darkroom tent. The resulting photograph would become crucial evidence. Chen's notes described the letters as approximately 3 inches tall, written with a finger dipped in blood deliberately formed. The H shows a slight tremor in the vertical strokes, suggesting the writer was injured or in motion. The K is clearer, more controlled. Were these Billy's initials? No. His full name was William Thomas Crandall. Were they the killer's initials? A location marker? A dying message? The search party departed at 9:00 a.m., following the trail east. They were prepared to find Billy's body within the first few miles. No one expected what they actually discovered. At mile marker 12, approximately 3 miles west of Mormon Tavern Station, the lead rider spotted something in the brush 20 feet off the main trail. The party dismounted and pushed through the manzanita thicket. They found Billy Crandall's clothing. His shirt, pants, boots, and undergarments lay in a neat pile, carefully folded as if prepared for laundering. No blood stained the clothing. No tears or signs of violence marked the fabric. His leather belt remained threaded through the pants loops, the buckle fastened. Inside the right boot they found his pocket watch, still running, showing the correct time. But no body. Deputy Clark recorded the scene. The clothing appeared placed deliberately, not torn from a body. The pile sat atop a flat granite boulder, elevated above the forest floor where it would be easily visible. Surrounding vegetation showed no signs of struggle, no broken branches, no disturbed soil, no blood trail. It was as if Crandall had calmly undressed, folded his clothing, and walked away naked into the forest. The search party expanded their perimeter, examining every gully, every thicket, every possible location where a body might lie hidden. They worked through the afternoon, calling Billy's name, firing shots into the air to signal their presence in case he was injured and disoriented. They found nothing. At Mormon Tavern Station, Klaus Hoffman provided crucial testimony. Billy had arrived at the relay station at approximately 9:15 p.m. the previous night, about 2 hours after departing Placerville. Klaus remembered the exchange clearly. Billy was in good spirits. He made the horse change quickly, selected the bay mare Duchess from my string, transferred the mochila, and departed within 5 minutes. I asked if he'd seen anyone suspicious on the trail. He said no, it had been a quiet ride. Those were his last words to me, quiet ride. Then he mounted and continued east. Klaus noticed nothing unusual about Billy's demeanor. No injuries, no signs of distress, no indication of being followed. The station keeper watched Billy ride into the darkness. The next scheduled relay point was Sportsman's Hall, 17 miles distant. Billy never arrived. Sheriff Blackwell ordered his men to search the trail section between Mormon Tavern and Sportsman's Hall with particular care. This 17-mile stretch wound through dense forest, crossed 3 creek fords, and climbed 2 significant ridges. The terrain offered countless ambush points. At mile marker 7 past Mormon Tavern, they found the blood. A section of trail approximately 20 feet long showed blood soaked into the dirt. The volume was substantial. The soil was saturated dark brown in several patches. Drag marks led from the trail into the forest, but only for 15 feet before terminating at a rocky outcropping where tracking became impossible. Blood drops led in the opposite direction, back west toward Mormon Tavern, for approximately 50 yards before they too ceased on bare rock. Dr. Emmanuel Frost, the physician accompanying the search party, examined the scene. The bleeding patterns indicate extreme violence. Based on volume, I estimate the victim lost between 4 and 6 pints of blood at this location. Such blood loss is typically fatal. If this is from Crandall, he would have been unconscious or dead within minutes. However, I observe no body. The drag marks suggest the victim or body was moved, but where it was taken remains unknown. The search party made camp at the site that night, continuing their search at dawn. Over the next 3 days, they expanded their search radius to 5 miles in every direction. They enlisted tracking dogs from Sacramento. The hounds picked up a scent trail that led 2 miles into the forest before losing it at the edge of a creek. They never found Billy Crandall's body, but on the 4th day of searching, they found something arguably worse. A hunter named Josiah Marks, who'd heard about the search and joined the effort, discovered a shallow grave 3 miles south of the main trail. The grave was fresh. The disturbed earth and withering wildflowers on the surface suggested it had been dug within the past week. The posse excavated the site carefully. They unearthed the body of a young man, approximately 20 years old, dressed in clothes similar to Pony Express rider attire. But it wasn't Billy Crandall. The victim had black hair where Billy had brown. The body showed signs of a brutal beating, fractured skull, broken ribs, massive internal trauma. Dr. Frost estimated death had occurred approximately 7 to 10 days prior, around April 7th to 10th. The victim carried no identification. No one reported him missing. The Pony Express Company insisted no riders had disappeared from their service. So who was he? And what did his murder have to do with Billy Crandall's disappearance? Sheriff Blackwell understood immediately that he was dealing with something far more complex than a simple robbery gone wrong. The evidence painted a disturbing picture. An unidentified murdered man, a missing Pony Express rider, blood-marked clothing arranged in ritualistic fashion, and witness reports of suspicious strangers asking questions about mail routes. On April 21st, Blackwell sent telegrams to law enforcement agencies across California, Nevada, and Utah territory, providing descriptions of the 3 strangers from Sarah Wickham's boarding house. The telegram read, "Wanted for questioning. 3 men, ages 30-45, traveling together. Leader, 6 feet tall, scarred left cheek. Second, shorter, heavy build, dark beard. Third, medium height, thin, nervous disposition, possibly connected to murder and disappearance of Pony Express rider, armed and dangerous." The response came faster than Blackwell anticipated. On April 23rd, the Carson City, Nevada marshal wired back, 3 men matching description arrested here April 22nd. attempting to sell bay gelding with PT brand. Horse identified as Duke, stolen from Mormon Tavern Station April 12th. Men in custody. Advise. Blackwell departed for Carson City immediately. Arriving on April 25th, the 3 prisoners were being held in the Nevada Territorial Prison, awaiting formal charges. Blackwell's interrogation notes provide a chilling window into what actually happened. Holloway, the scarred man who'd questioned Billy at the boarding house, initially refused to speak. But when Blackwell presented evidence, Sarah Wickham's sworn testimony, the stolen horse, and blood-stained equipment found in their possession, Holloway's resolve crumbled. His confession, recorded by a court stenographer, revealed a conspiracy that stunned investigators. We didn't mean to kill anyone at first. It was supposed to be simple. Intercept the mail, copy certain letters, return them before anyone noticed. We were being paid $500 each by representatives of certain California land speculators who needed advance information about federal land surveys being sent to Nevada territory. Those letters passed through the Pony Express. If we could read them before they reached government offices, our employers could file claims ahead of official announcements. It would be worth millions. The scheme had been planned for weeks. Holloway, using his former position at the land office, knew exactly which dates would carry the most valuable correspondence. They'd stolen Duke from Mormon Tavern Station to study his speed and capabilities, ensuring they could match pace with Pony Express horses during an interception. But the plan went catastrophically wrong. We followed a rider on April 9th, the one with red hair. He spotted us and got away. We realized riders would be on guard after that. So we decided to grab one, take the mail by force, read what we needed, then release the rider somewhere remote, where he couldn't identify us for a day or two. On April 16th, they'd positioned themselves on the trail between Mormon Tavern and Sportsman's Hall, waiting for Billy Crandall. They'd blocked the trail at the location where the blood was later found. Holloway's account continues. The kid never had a chance. We stepped out of the trees, 3 guns pointed at him. I told him to dismount slowly, hand over the mochila, and nobody would get hurt. He was terrified but compliant. He got off the horse, started unhooking the mail pouch. Then prisoner 2, identified as Robert Kinsey, a former miner, intervened in the robbery, and everything collapsed into violence. Kinsey's interrogation revealed him to be the unstable element in the conspiracy. Sheriff Blackwell's notes describe him as agitated, remorseless, and prone to outbursts. Kinsey's version of events contradicted Holloway's in crucial ways. Holloway's lying about it being gentle. The kid recognized me. I'd worked claims near Placerville 2 years back, had run-ins with the law. He looked at me and said, "I know you." That's when I knew we couldn't let him go. He could identify us. Holloway kept saying we'd just take the mail and leave the kid tied up. But that was stupid. He'd talk, we'd hang. Kinsey admitted to striking Billy with his rifle butt, dropping the young rider to the ground. Then, in Kinsey's words, "I did what had to be done. I cut his throat. Quick." He didn't suffer long. But the story took an even darker turn. Karcher provided the most disturbing testimony. Sheriff Blackwell noted, "This prisoner shows signs of severe psychological instability. His account suggests the crime extended far beyond simple murder." According to Karcher, after Kinsey killed Billy Crandall, panic set in among the conspirators. They had a body, a blood-soaked crime scene, and a terrified horse. Holloway wanted to bury the body immediately and flee. Kinsey wanted to examine the mail first, complete the job they'd been paid for. Karcher suggested something different. I said we should make it look like something else, something that would confuse investigators, buy us time. I'd read about ritual killings used by certain groups to intimidate enemies. If we staged the scene to look like a ceremonial murder rather than a robbery, maybe law enforcement would waste time investigating secret societies or religious cults instead of tracking us. Karcher had directed the arrangement of Billy's clothing on the boulder, the folded, undisturbed presentation meant to suggest ritualistic significance. He'd used Billy's blood to write HK on the horse. His own initials, a piece of misdirection he thought was clever. I figured if they thought the killer was stupid enough to sign his work, they'd be looking for someone arrogant and sloppy, not 3 careful planners. But the most horrifying detail came next. After killing Billy and staging the scene, the conspirators had a problem. They needed to dispose of the body where it would never be found. Karcher, who'd served in the army before deserting in 1857, knew the terrain intimately. 5 miles south of the trail, an abandoned mine shaft descended 200 feet into the earth. They transported Billy's body to this location and dropped it into the shaft. It was deep enough that we couldn't hear the body hit bottom, Karcher stated. We collapsed the entrance with explosives I'd kept from my mining days. That boy's body is under tons of rock now. Nobody will ever find him. Sheriff Blackwell organized an expedition to locate this mine shaft. On May 3rd, using Karcher's directions, they found it, or what remained of it. The entrance had indeed been destroyed with explosives. The surrounding rock face showed blast patterns, and debris filled what had once been an opening. A mining engineer assessed the site and concluded, to excavate this shaft would require weeks of labor and substantial equipment. Even then, we might not reach the bottom. The risk of further collapse is high. The decision was made to seal the shaft permanently rather than attempt recovery. Billy Crandall's body would remain there, unclaimed and unreachable. But what about the unidentified body found during the search? The young man who resembled a Pony Express rider buried in a shallow grave? Karcher provided the answer, and it revealed the conspiracy had started far earlier than anyone suspected. That was our test run, April 8th. We'd been planning this for 3 weeks but wanted to practice the interception technique. We grabbed a drifter who looked like he could be a rider. Same age, similar build, wearing trail clothes. We stopped him at gunpoint, demanded his cooperation, but he fought back. Kinsey beat him to death. We panicked and buried him poorly. That should have been our warning to stop, but the money was too good, so we kept going. The test run victim was eventually identified through missing person reports as Thomas McCready, a 21-year-old ranch hand from Sacramento who'd been traveling to Virginia City seeking mining work. His family hadn't reported him missing immediately, assuming he'd simply left for Nevada as planned. His identification came only after investigators circulated descriptions and dental records across the territory. As interrogations continued, the true scope of the conspiracy emerged. Holloway provided names of the men who'd hired them, wealthy land speculators in San Francisco with political connections reaching the state legislature. These men had been systematically bribing land office clerks, intercepting surveyor reports, and pre-filing claims on federal lands before they were officially offered for sale. The Pony Express, with its reliable schedule and known routes, had become an intelligence pipeline. They needed someone to tap that pipeline. Holloway, desperate after losing his government job due to budget cuts, had volunteered for the task. California Attorney General Edward Baker opened a formal investigation on May 15, 1860. His investigators identified 7 additional co-conspirators in San Francisco, including 2 sitting members of the California State Assembly. The scandal reached newspapers across the nation. The San Francisco Chronicle published a series of exposés titled Bloodmail: The Corruption of the Express, detailing how wealthy elites had orchestrated the murders of 2 innocent men for financial gain. The trial of Marcus Holloway, Robert Kinsey, and Henry Karcher began on June 18, 1860, in Carson City, Nevada Territory. The proceedings lasted 6 days. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, confessions, physical evidence, the stolen horse, blood-stained equipment, witness testimony from Sarah Wickham and Klaus Hoffman, and forensic analysis from Dr. Frost. The defense attorneys argued their clients were mere tools of a larger conspiracy manipulated by wealthy men who would face no consequences. Defense attorney Harold Simmons made an impassioned closing argument. These men are guilty, yes, but they are not the architects of this horror. They are hammers wielded by hands that will never be bloodied. Men who sit in mahogany offices counting money earned through the death of a 19-year-old boy whose only crime was trusting in the honesty of his fellow man. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts, 2 counts of first-degree murder, Billy Crandall and Thomas McCready, conspiracy to commit robbery, theft of federal mail, and numerous lesser charges. Sentencing occurred on June 26, 1860. Judge Samuel Whitman, no relation to station manager Robert Whitman, pronounced sentence. Marcus Holloway, Robert Kinsey, Henry Karcher, you have been found guilty of crimes so heinous they shock the conscience of this court and this community. You murdered 2 young men whose futures held promise and hope. You did so not in passion, not in desperation, but in cold calculation for financial gain. You disposed of their bodies with the casual indifference of men discarding trash. This court can conceive of no punishment adequate to your crimes within the bounds of law. Therefore, you are each sentenced to death by hanging. May God have mercy on your souls, for this court has none. The executions were scheduled for July 30th, 1860. Over 2,000 people attended, the largest public gathering in Carso. End city history. The Nevada Territorial Enterprise reported. The 3 condemned men mounted the scaffold with varying degrees of composure. Holloway appeared resigned, Karcher defiant, Kinsey terrified. At 10:47 a.m., the trapdoors opened. Justice was served, though it cannot resurrect the dead or heal the wounds inflicted upon their families. The prosecution of the San Francisco land speculators proved far more complicated. Attorney General Baker faced enormous political pressure to abandon the investigation. 2 of the implicated state assembly members resigned before formal charges could be filed. 3 of the wealthy conspirators fled to Mexico. Only 2 men faced trial, warehouse owner Preston Lodge and land speculator Martin Ashford. Their trials, held in San Francisco in September 1860, resulted in convictions on conspiracy charges but not murder charges. The prosecution couldn't definitively prove they'd known Holloway's team would resort to killing. Lodge received 5 years in San Quentin prison. Ashford received 7 years. Both were released early for good behavior, Lodge after 3 years, Ashford after 4. The investigation revealed they'd paid Holloway's team $1,500 up front, with promises of $3,500 upon successful completion of the mail interception. The payments were traced through bank records to offshore accounts in Panama. Investigators estimated the conspirators had already earned over $300,000 through fraudulent land claims based on illegally obtained Federal Survey information. None of that money was ever recovered. The scandal devastated the Pony Express Company's reputation precisely when they needed public confidence to secure government contracts. The company implemented immediate security reforms, armed escorts for riders in vulnerable sections, encrypted seals on sensitive mail, background investigations of all relay station personnel, and a strict policy prohibiting riders from discussing routes or schedules with anyone outside the company. But the damage was done. Newspapers questioned whether any mail was safe with the Express. Businesses began seeking alternative delivery methods. The federal government delayed awarding the $1 million mail contract. The Pony Express, already operating at a financial loss, couldn't sustain the setback. In October 1861, just 18 months after Billy Crandall's murder, the company declared bankruptcy. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph in October 1861 made horse-borne mail obsolete, but the scandal had already sealed the Express's fate. Billy's uncle, Marcus Crandall, traveled from Sacramento to attend the trial and execution. He testified about Billy's character. He was a good boy, honest, hard-working. He believed in the Pony Express mission, connecting our divided nation through communication. He died doing his duty. But he shouldn't have died at all. The company failed him. The law failed him. And now I stand here, the last of our family line, speaking for a nephew whose body I cannot bury. Marcus filed a civil lawsuit against the Pony Express Company for wrongful death, arguing they'd ignored multiple warnings about suspicious activity on Billy's route. The company settled out of court for $5,000, a substantial sum in 1860, but poor compensation for a life. Marcus used the money to commission a memorial monument in the Placerville Cemetery. The granite marker stands 6 feet tall, inscribed with Billy's name, dates, and the words, "William Crandall, Pony Express rider. He died delivering hope. His sacrifice must not be forgotten." The monument still stands, today, weathered but legible, visited by historians and descendants of Pony Express riders each year. The Billy Crandall murder case resonated far beyond the immediate tragedy, triggering legal reforms and exposing systemic vulnerabilities in America's frontier communication infrastructure. In December 1860, California Senator William Gwin introduced the Federal Mail Protection Act in direct response to the Pony Express murders. The legislation, which passed in March 1861, established several precedents. 1. Federal jurisdiction over mail crimes. Previously, crimes involving mail theft fell under state jurisdiction, unless specifically crossing state boundaries. The new law made any interference with federal mail a federal crime regardless of location, punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment or death if murder occurred during the commission of the crime. 2. Armed protection requirements. Mail carriers operating in territories were authorized to carry weapons and empowered to use lethal force in defense of the mail. This provision would later be expanded to apply to railway mail service employees. 3. Mandatory incident reporting. Mail service companies were required to report any suspicious activity, threats, or security concerns to federal authorities within 24 hours. Failure to report could result in loss of federal contracts. 4. Corporate liability standards. Companies operating mail services could be held civilly liable for employee deaths resulting from negligent security practices. This provision fundamentally changed how courier services assessed risk. The Federal Mail Protection Act remained the primary legal framework for mail security until the establishment of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service in 1877, which further professionalized mail crime investigation. The Pony Express Company's dismissal of multiple security warnings, Red McGovern's report of followers, Klaus Hoffman's concerns about station surveillance, Thomas Brennan's ambush warning, became a case study in corporate negligence. Labor advocates used the Crandall case to argue for stronger worker protection laws. The California Labor Protection League, founded in 1862, cited Billy's death in their organizing materials. William Crandall died because his employers valued schedule over safety, profits over people. His death was preventable. How many more young men must perish before we demand accountability? These advocacy efforts contributed to California passing some of the nation's first workplace safety regulations in 1866, requiring companies to investigate credible threats to employee safety, and providing legal recourse for families of workers killed due to employer negligence. The exposure of the San Francisco land conspiracy triggered a broader examination of corruption in Western land deals. Federal investigators discovered the practice of intercepting government survey information was widespread. The Holloway conspiracy was just one of dozens of similar schemes operating across California, Nevada, and Oregon. In 1861, Congress passed the Land Survey Protection Act, which required all federal survey data to be transmitted through multiple independent channels with discrepancies, investigated established criminal penalties for government employees who leaked survey information, created the Office of Land Fraud Investigation within the Department of Interior, mandated public notification of survey completion before any claims could be filed. These reforms helped curtail, though not eliminate, fraudulent land speculation practices that had plagued Western expansion. One of the most haunting aspects of the Crandall case was the fate of the 47 letters he carried. After serving as evidence in the trial, the mail was finally delivered, nearly 3 months late. The Pony Express Company hired a rider to complete Billy's final run, delivering each letter with a black mourning band around the envelope and a printed notice explaining the delay. Several recipients wrote public letters describing their reactions to receiving letters from beyond the grave, correspondence carried by a murdered man, delivered long after the information contained within had become obsolete. Business deals collapsed, time-sensitive legal documents expired, personal letters arrived announcing events that had long since passed. The poet Sarah Morrison published The Dead Letter Carrier in the Sacramento Union newspaper, memorializing Billy and the tragic disconnect between the promise of communication and the reality of frontier danger. He rode through darkness bearing hope, his saddlebags filled with tomorrow's news, but tomorrow never came for him, only blood and silence and unmarked graves. The letters arrived, but too late, like prayers whispered after death has claimed its due. The phrase dead letter, originally referring to undeliverable mail, took on new morbid significance in frontier communities. It became slang for any communication touched by tragedy or delivered too late to matter. The surviving Pony Express riders were deeply traumatized by Billy's death. Company records show 8 riders resigned in the weeks following the murder, citing fear for their safety. Red McGovern, who'd reported being followed days before Billy's death, suffered what we would now recognize as survivor's guilt. His diary entries from May 1860 are heartbreaking. May 7th, I should have done more. I should have refused to ride until the company investigated. I should have warned Billy specifically. Instead, I filed a report and rode on, grateful it wasn't me those men were hunting. Now Billy's dead, and I'm alive, and I don't know how to carry that weight. McGovern left the Pony Express in June 1860 and never worked as a professional rider again. He died in 1889, but his obituary in the Nevada State Journal included a detail that suggests he never forgave himself. McGovern kept a small photograph of William Crandall on his bedside table for nearly 30 years, a silent memorial to the fellow rider he felt he'd failed to protect. Several riders reported nightmares about being followed on the trail. Michael Torres, the young rider who'd been waiting for Billy in Sacramento and witnessed the blood-soaked horse arrive, developed what we would now call PTSD. Company medical records note he suffered from night terrors, recurring visions of blood, and an inability to ride after darkness fell. The company transferred him to daytime clerk duty before the Express closed. The Crandall case revealed how information itself had become a valuable and dangerous commodity in the expanding American West. The letters he carried weren't robbed for their physical value. No money, no gold, no jewels. They were targeted for the information they contained. survey data, land descriptions, mineral assessments, knowledge that could be worth millions to those who possessed it first. This represented a new kind of frontier crime. Previous mail robberies targeted physical valuables. The Crandall conspiracy represented something more insidious: the theft of information, the monetization of data, the recognition that knowledge about the future was more valuable than gold in the ground. Historian Patricia Limerick, in her 1987 book The Legacy of Conquest, argues that the Crandall murder marked a turning point. It was the moment the American frontier fully entered the information age. Violence was no longer primarily about taking physical resources, but about controlling the flow of information that determined who would control those resources. Billy Crandall didn't die for gold. He died for data. And in that transformation, we see the beginnings of modern corporate espionage, information warfare, and the commodification of knowledge that defines our contemporary world. The Crandall murder was not unique, but it was the highest profile case that exposed a pattern of violence targeting communication workers on the frontier. Investigation following the trial revealed at least 12 other suspicious disappearances or deaths of mail carriers, telegraph operators, and freight haulers in California and Nevada between 1858 and 1860. Most disturbing was the discovery that 3 other Pony Express riders had disappeared under suspicious circumstances before Billy. September 1860. A rider named Joseph S. Ummers vanished in Utah Territory, his horse found wandering. No body recovered. October 1860. David Chen, one of the few Chinese riders employed by the Express, disappeared in Nevada. Witnesses reported seeing 3 men following him days before November 1860. Maria Vasquez, disguised as a male rider under the name Miguel Vasquez, vanished in New Mexico Territory. Her true identity only revealed when family members reported her missing. None of these cases received the investigative attention given to Billy's murder. Historians believe this reflected both the lower profile of the victims and the company's desire to suppress information about ongoing security problems. Despite Karcher's confession that he'd written his initials on Bella's shoulder as misdirection, some investigators remained unconvinced. Deputy Clark, who'd been first to notice the letters, maintained until his death in 1903 that the blood letters showed characteristics inconsistent with Karcher's account, particularly the trembling stroke pattern suggesting injury or duress. Clark's private papers, donated to the California State Archives in 1925, include a note written in 1885. "I never believed Karcher wrote those letters. The blood was Billy's. The finger that wrote them belonged to someone losing strength, fighting unconsciousness. I believe Billy wrote them himself, his final act before death. But what did HK mean to him? A message? An accusation? A name he knew? We'll never know." Karcher claimed credit for something I don't believe he did, perhaps to appear more clever than he was. The truth died with Billy in that mine shaft. Various theories have been proposed over the years. HK stood for Help Klaus, referring to station keeper Klaus Hoffman. The letters were an incomplete message. HK were the first 2 letters of something longer Billy tried to write before bleeding out. They represented initials of someone Billy suspected of conspiracy. They were coordinates, or a location marker. Only Billy would have understood. The mystery remains unsolved, one of those historical questions that tantalize without resolution. The Crandall case became one of the most retold frontier stories of the 19th century, appearing in dime novels, newspaper serials, and eventually stage plays. Most of these retellings were sensationalized and inaccurate, portraying Billy as a heroic fighter who took down multiple attackers before being overwhelmed, or as a tragic romantic figure riding to meet a secret lover. The 1872 novel Blood on the Trail, a Pony Express murder by popular author Ned Buntline, bore almost no resemblance to actual events, but sold over 50,000 copies. Buntline's Billy dies in a shootout with 20 bandits, managing to kill 15 of them before succumbing to his wounds, his final act delivering the mail to a beautiful ranch owner's daughter. It wasn't until the 1920s that serious historical treatment of the case appeared. Historian Agnes Wright's 1925 book The Real Pony Express, Beyond the Legend, included a meticulously researched chapter on Billy's murder, based on court transcripts and contemporary newspaper accounts. Wright's work helped separate fact from frontier mythology. Today, the Crandall case is studied in criminal justice programs as an example of early forensic investigation techniques. The photograph of the bloody letters on Bella's shoulder, taken by Samuel Chen using wet plate collodion process, is one of the earliest crime scene photographs in American law enforcement history. It resides in the Smithsonian Institution's archives, A haunting piece of evidence from a case that changed how America thought about male security, corporate responsibility, and the price of frontier expansion. The sorrel mare stands in her stall in Sacramento, fed and watered, her wounds cleaned and treated. She lives for another 7 years, retired from service, kept by a family who treats her kindly. Children visit to pet the famous horse who carry. Ed the blood message. She dies peacefully in 1867, outliving the Pony Express by 6 years. Billy Crandall remains in his unmarked grave, 200 feet below the earth, buried under tons of rock in a collapsed mine shaft that will never be excavated. No one knows exactly where he lies. The terrain has changed. Erosion, forest growth, human development have all obscured the landmarks that might have marked his resting place. He is 19 years old forever, his body preserved in the darkness, his story told in the light. The 47 letters he died protecting sit in the California State Archives now, preserved behind glass. The black mourning bands still wrapped around them. They are letters between people long dead, discussing business deals that collapsed, legal matters that expired, personal news that became obsolete. They are artifacts of futility and tragedy. But they are also evidence of something more. They prove that Billy Crandall completed his mission. The mail was delivered. He died doing his duty. Marcus Holloway, Robert Kinsey, and Henry Karcher hang on the same scaffold on the same morning, their bodies buried in the prison cemetery in unmarked graves. No one mourns them. No one remembers them beyond their crimes. They are footnotes in Billy's story, the darkness that swallowed light, the 3 wealthy conspirators who funded the murders, those who weren't prosecuted or who fled to Mexico. Some of them go on to live comfortable lives, their wealth intact, their reputations eventually restored through time and social amnesia. This is perhaps the most bitter injustice. Those most responsible escape consequences, while the least powerful pay the ultimate price. What do you think drove these men to such acts? Was it simple greed, or something darker? The dehumanization that occurs when you value information over lives, profits over people? Could better corporate policies have saved Billy Crandall, or was his death an inevitable consequence of frontier capitalism where human lives were calculated as acceptable losses in the pursuit of progress? Leave your theories in the comments below. Tell us what you think HK really meant. Share your thoughts on whether justice was truly served. If this story moved you, subscribe to The Silent Abbey for more lost chapters of American history. The stories they don't teach in schools, the crimes that shaped our nation, the victims who deserve to be remembered. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Billy Crandall was 19 years old. He rode through darkness carrying hope. He died doing his duty. His story, at least, will not be forgotten. See you in the next video, where we'll uncover another mystery buried in history's shadows.